This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have a very special guest today. No one's heard from him for over a decade. He's very important in the context of what's going on today with regard to the Justice Department and Bruce Ohr and all the criminals over there. His name is Peter Paul. You may remember him because when I was running Judicial Watch back in the 1990s, he came to see me. He said he had put on a Hollywood tribute to Bill Clinton, which raised nearly $2 million in hard money campaign contributions for Hillary Clinton's Senate campaign in that year. Actually, it was the year 2000. And Peter came forward with all this information, canceled checks, photographs, everything. The Clintons were dead to rights. At the time, he was being investigated for securities and later bank fraud. And we agreed to represent him if he would come forward and spill the beans on the Clintons. And we're going to have the story of what happened after that, because fast forward, who was involved? None other than Bruce Ohr. So listen very intently to the second and third segments of the show today, because the past is a prologue, and Peter Paul remains a very important player in this history of what's happening at the Justice Department and what's happening today. But you know me as a person of action. I just don't sit around and get documents and take the documents over to Fox News and say, hey, put me on so I can beat my chest and tell the world how great I am. Those are my former colleagues at Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton in particular. You know I've been critical of him. He's not an ethical person, to say the least. And someday I'll tell the whole story about that. But the fact is that we at Freedom Watch bring hard-hitting cases, and Larry Klayman personally brings hard-hitting cases. We have so many documents. We have so much evidence. The same thing's true for Congress. You know, they go on TV and on Fox News and elsewhere, this is what we're doing, this is what we intend to do. We've got Senator Lindsey Graham. I'm going to conduct a hearing into what happened at the Justice Department when he's asked, are you going to, force prosecutions? He says, well, I have no power to do that. I'm just going to get answers to questions. You know, we have enough answers to questions. What we need is justice, because our justice system has fallen apart. And that's why I founded Judicial Watch. When I ran Judicial Watch for 10 years, that's what we did. We brought real cases, not just Freedom of Information Act cases, getting documents. We brought hard-hitting other actions that were super important in bringing about justice. And that's what I'm doing now at Freedom Watch. I want you to go to freedomwatchusa.org, support our cause, contribute with tax-deductible contributions. We need the help. We need to get bigger. We've got so many cases and so many citizens' grand juries that we have lined up ready to start that we need that support. But in my private capacity, I also represent clients. And one of those clients was on this show a few weeks ago. Her name is Laurie Luhn, L-U-H-N, Laurie Luhn. Laurie Luhn was the right-hand person to Roger Ailes at Fox News, as probably you know by now. And she was sexually abused. She was assaulted. She was really treated like dirt by Roger Ailes. And we brought lawsuits on her behalf with regard to Showtime and Blumhouse Television and a writer by the name of Gabriel Sherman, because they're doing an 8-part miniseries called The Loudest Voice in the Room. And in fact, Laurie Luhn is one of the principal players in that miniseries, played by A-list actress Annabelle Wallis. Yet Showtime and Blumhouse don't want to even use Ms. Luhn as a consultant so they get the facts right. There have been articles before written by Gabriel Sherman. He did it for his own profit. He then wrote this book, Loudest Voice in the Room. He sold it to Showtime and Blumhouse. He's making a lot of money, but they won't let Laurie Loon participate in telling the real story because what Sherman wrote previously, in large part, was incorrect. And we want to make sure this is an accurate rendition of the large-scale sexual abuse, mistreatment of women that went on at Fox News and is still going on today. Now, this week, we filed a lawsuit. I filed it in my private capacity in the District of Delaware. That's where Blumhouse Television and where Showtime are incorporated. And it alleges that these entities are using Miss Loon's likeness and being, her life story, to make money, to make a lot of money, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And we simply ask that she be fairly compensated because during the time that after she had left Fox News, and when everything hit the fan, when Gretchen Carlson, one of the hosts, former Miss America, brought a lawsuit against Roger Ailes, that's when everything came out. And it was at that time, in particular, that Fox News wanted to cover up this large-scale sexual abuse and harassment. And, of course, Ailes was not the only one. There was Bill O'Reilly. There were others over there that were sexually harassing women. It was being covered up. Now, who was covering it up? Ailes' right-hand man, Bill Shine, who later became the director of communications in the White House with President Trump. It was a mistake by President Trump. He has a weakness. I love the president, but his weakness is that everything revolves around Fox News. Well, you know, some things shouldn't revolve around Fox News, and that means hiring some guy that covered up crimes by Roger Ailes. But who else covered up those crimes? An individual by the name of Suzanne Scott. She was also in that inner circle of Roger Ailes. Now, what happened after Ailes had to step down, after he was, in effect, fired because the heat got too hot in the kitchen for Fox News, is that Suzanne Scott was made the CEO, the chief executive officer of Fox News. Now, why did Fox News do that? Because she knew where the bodies were buried. She knew where the skeletons were buried. And they needed a woman to come in there to deflect from all this abuse that had occurred towards women at Fox News. Now, Suzanne Scott knows about what happened to Laurie Loon. I urge you to go to LarryKlayman.com and read the complaint. This is a situation which is very, very serious because this kind of conduct, this dishonesty, is what continues on at the network. Now, you all have to be asking yourself the question, why is Larry Klayman, a conservative, critical of Fox News? Because I dealt with him a long time ago. You can read about it in my book, Whores, Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment. You can buy that at Amazon.com. You can buy it at BarnesandNoble.com. You could buy it at WND.com, other places, booksellers. You know, when I wrote that book, I wanted to tell the truth. I've never minced words. I always say it like it is as far as I'm concerned. People may differ with me, but I'm going to say what I believe. And that's why I love the president, too, because he says what he believes. But he's thrown himself in bed with the wrong network in many ways. There needs to be a new conservative network. There needs to be something done. Sinclair Broadcasting was trying to be a rival to Fox News, and I think that it got wired by Fox News and its lobbying, and Merger was killed. Newsmax needs to be promoted more. One America Network, OAN, needs to be boosted up. We need competition because, frankly, this network is going left, in addition to covering up this ongoing sexual abuse. You've got Judge Napolitano, so-called Judge Napolitano, is taking a shot at Trump every step of the way. Chris Wallace on Sunday taking shots at President Trump. Shepard Smith, others over there. See, the network is run and owned by the Murdochs. The Murdoch brothers now run it. James Murdoch is a liberal. Lachlan Murdoch, another son, is kind of in between. But they're playing both sides of the street, and that's what Fox has been doing. Even the president's been critical of them. And that's why it's important that you support this show, Radio America's show, Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman, because we offer an alternative voice. We just don't, tell things that people want to hear. You listen to Hannity each night, and you just hear stuff that makes people feel good. Gee, this is going to happen. You got Jim Jordan on. You got Mark Meadows. You got Sarah Carter with that smile of hers, which, like everything is great, that there's these major scandals. Well, you know what? I don't know what world she lives in, but things are not that great. She's just happy to be on TV. We need action right now. We don't need mincing words. And while Hannity complains about the leftist media, it's Freedom Watch that has a leftist media strike force. Either Freedom Watch or Larry Klayman privately for his clients have sued the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, Rolling Stone, Showtime, Blumhouse Television, NBC, a number of different entities. We've sued them for libel. We've sued them for slander. We've sued them for other things. Social media companies. We brought antitrust lawsuit. That's working its way through the courts because of the discrimination against conservatives. You need to support what these people are doing that are putting their neck out. Freedom Watch's clients, my private clients, at least in terms of Freedom Watch's clients, go to freedomwatchusa.org, support our cause with tax-deductible contributions. And we have other clients as well, like Jerry Corsi, who are fighting against this tyranny, who wasn't indicted. I represented him. That was a tremendous victory, but now he's under the gun with regard to Congress. His legal defense fund needs support. So if you can, send contributions to 2020 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, Suite 800, Washington, D.C., 2006. That goes to Jerry Corsi's legal defense fund. We've got the Bundys. That's www.clivenbundydefensefund.org, www.clivenbundydefensefund.org. That needs your support, and we're on the verge of the major victory there because the Ninth Circuit's going to open up the record, and we'll be able to take the testimony, we believe, of a whistleblower that said there was a kill list on the heads of the Bundys. That should end that appeal by the government. Let the Bundys go off and live their lives and be the great heroes that they are. These are the kinds of things that Larry Klayman is doing. I'm not just going out there and playing cards with a bunch of documents. I'm putting money on the table here to get justice for this country. And that's why we need your strong support at Freedom Watch, and that's why my private clients need your strong support. We're going to be back shortly with Peter Paul, because this tells a story as well as to what's been happening over the last many years with regard to the lack of justice in this country and why you need a special prosecutor with Larry Klayman to bring it back. I'll be right back with Peter Paul.
Dangerous.
Don't care. Use the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I'm back with my client, someone who really hasn't been heard from for almost 18 years. He's an individual by the name of Peter Paul. He had information about the criminality of the Clintons. He risked his freedom. He risked his family's well-being to come forward with the truth. And we're going to tell that story today. You can read about it, too, in my book, Whores, Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment, which came out in 2009. And he has a history with Bruce Ohr, the infamous Bruce Ohr, in terms of what happened with regard to him. Peter, welcome to Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Tell us, the listeners, how it is that you came to meet me, what the situation was at that time in 2001, and what you had been doing with regard to the Clintons.
It's a long story. I was building a global internet entertainment company with my best friend, the creator of all of the Marvel superheroes, Stan Lee. I thought, in connection with building a global enterprise at the time, that associating a former president as a outside director of the company to advance our global aspirations was a good idea. Little did I know the history of the Clintons in dealing with people that they associated with in business. And the situation that evolved after I was able to make an offer to Bill Clinton June of 2000 in anticipation of him leaving the White House. I was represented in my efforts by the chairman of the Democratic Party, Ed Rendell, who indicated that my financial support of Hillary Clinton's first political campaign would be the way to get Bill Clinton's interest in post-White House employment. And so I proceeded to become Hillary Clinton's largest donor for her inaugural political activity, running for the Senate in New York. I produced the largest fundraiser in history for a federal candidate as a gala farewell for Bill Clinton, and the largest private concert that had been produced with international headliners for 1,500 people, which included the leaders of the Democratic Party and leaders in the entertainment industry. That activity cost me close to $1.5 million, which was an in-kind contribution to her political campaign. I wasn't aware at the time that there were such things as in-kind contributions, and that would be excessive by approximately $1,498,000 in terms of my ability to make a direct contribution for her campaign. To summarize, what happened after that was immediately after I produced this fundraising event, and I had coordinated with Hillary's chief of staff and other personnel who were giving her daily reports and inviting her involvement in helping associate talent for the gala concert, which she actively did, and negotiating with the producer that I hired to produce the event. He was CBS's #1 specials producer, Gary Smith, who is a friend of Hillary's, and she helped negotiate his fee. That her involvement and my contribution effectively made the entire process a violation of federal election laws. And that activity was subsequently hidden by the Clintons for various reasons. That was triggered initially by the...
Peter, we're going to be right back, and we're going to continue this because this is a super important story because it comes fast forward today, particularly with regard to allegations that President Trump has violated campaign finance laws. Whatever the allegations were, it pales compared to what we're talking about now. We'll be right back with Peter Paul.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
We're back with Peter Paul. Peter, continue on with this story because this is very important for the American people to understand. You understand the Clintons better than anybody else. In fact, when you came forward, you had photographs and checks and everything else. Explain how it is you came to see me at Judicial Watch at the time over all of this and why.
Well, Bill Clinton, through the intermediary that he directed to coordinate our activities together and to communicate the deal points that he would require to become an outside director. He appointed a fellow out of Chicago named James Levin, who I subsequently learned is the father of the modern lap dance. He had gentleman's club in Chicago, and that's apparently what endeared him to Clinton. Anyway, that fellow went back and forth between Washington and Los Angeles in my offices. He vetted me and the company, which was a public company at the time, and he communicated an offer that I made of a package of $17 million in stock and cash for Clinton to devote a year after he left the White House to meetings that we would arrange in Europe and Asia. And part of the negotiations occurred when Clinton was at Camp David, and Levin went to visit him there to conclude the arrangements. And Levin then proceeded to coordinate with my Japanese investor, who had the largest animation company in Asia at the time, and he wanted to have Clinton help promote his activities as well. So this Mr. Levin ultimately seduced my investor at a time when the dot-com meltdown was occurring, and ours was a dot-com company, a leader in internet entertainment at the time. And Levin made a secret trip to Japan on Clinton's behalf to induce my investor to go into business with Clinton and Levin directly, which was something that Larry discovered in research that was subsequently done that showed a few days after Hillary's election, they actually formed a joint venture in Chicago that diverted the investment commitment that the Japanese investor made in the company, which would contributed to the cash issues that ultimately resulted in the company stopping doing business and ultimately going into Chapter 11. So the involvement of Clinton, rather than becoming an advantage, contributed to the actual collapse of the company.
And there came a point in time, Peter, when you got word that you were under investigation by the Justice Department for alleged securities fraud, correct?
Well, no. I had been interacting with a fellow that I had worked with years previously in Miami, who worked with the government as a cooperating individual, it's called, and I was coordinating with him regarding actions that were taken by various people to help collapse the stock in the company. And I went to Brazil when my company collapsed to manage my last major investment, which was the largest English as a second language company in South America based in Brazil. Most people associate going to Brazil with trying to avoid extradition for whatever offense they might commit in the United States. And those people have no knowledge of the fact that Brazil has one of the strongest extradition treaties of any country in the world. It's the only place, in fact, that you can't waive extradition to be able to go home. Your matter has to be adjudicated by the entire Supreme Court of Brazil, which we learned subsequently. Anyway, the point is that I was in Brazil when I realized that the Clintons, in their federal reporting to the Federal Election Commission, misrepresented the cost of the fundraising activities that I was supporting and omitted the fact that I was the biggest donor to her campaign. At that point, I started to panic about the idea that I might be being set up here, so I looked for representation to represent me in what I knew was going to be problematic, with me exposing the fact that the Clintons filed false federal election returns and what became the biggest campaign finance fraud ever in terms of the magnitude of the contribution and the way that it was hidden. I found Larry and Judicial Watch on the internet from Brazil and saw that Larry's commitment to holding the Clintons accountable on a variety of issues made him ideal to approach to represent me in this, which was going to clearly become a major battle with the forces that the Clintons controlled. And so I began communicating with Larry, arranged a meeting in Miami with him, and he vetted all of my allegations. I had videos that nobody else has ever taken of Hillary, an hour-and-a-half luncheon conversation, for example, among other things, which clearly demonstrated I had a special relationship with them, that they would allow me to invade the privacy of a private conversation by taking videotapes, of which I had a number of them. I had letters and checks, and all corroborating the fact that this contribution was not only made by me, but was well known by them, and subsequently was misrepresented in media statements that were made regarding that. And so Larry and Judicial Watch got involved to represent me, and that led to years of litigation.
Tell us the involvement of Bruce Ohr, because he's been in the news lately. He obviously was doing the bidding of Hillary Clinton in this Fusion GPS scandal, the Steele dossier, Nellie Ohr, very much of a Clinton partisan. And try to relate it to what happened to you during that period of time with regard to Bruce Ohr.
Sure. Yeah, I was, after Larry met with 3 prosecutors from California, New York, and New Jersey to make a proffer of the information that I had regarding both the Clintons and the people responsible for the collapse of my stock and my company. Suddenly, in the middle of negotiating who we would deal with, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York, which includes Central Islip, they suddenly indicted me with no notice to the other parties that had been approached by Larry. And as it turns out, the Eastern District, as it's based in Central Islip, is the domain of a fellow named Harold Ickes, whose law firm is the most powerful law firm in that area. Harold Ickes is the fixer that Hillary and Bill Clinton have used historically, and he was a campaign manager for her campaign. And so the fact that I was indicted in New York, in Central Islip, where I had absolutely no connection with any activities there other than the fact that a broker lived in Long Island, which was the only link between any jurisdiction in the Eastern District of New York and the issues that they were making about the stock collapsing in my company, which I did everything possible, and the evidence demonstrated that my effort was to support the stock and protect shareholders from losing value. The charge that ultimately was made against me was that I was pumping and dumping, which is a term of art that relates to elevating the price of the stock of a company, and then when you've elevated it, you sell at that price and allow the company, the stock, to collapse. In my case, I bought the stock as it was collapsing to avoid it collapsing. And that in itself is a civil matter. It isn't a 10b-5 stock fraud, which is what I was charged with.
Peter, Harold Ickes also, as you know, was Deputy White House Chief of Staff during the Clinton administration. So it's no accident that he had you indicted and Hillary walks off scot-free. But at that point, when we had to confront this indictment and step in to try to defend you, we were involved with Bruce Orr, who was head of the criminal division, criminal crime task force of the Justice Department. And
he, in fact, he was only the head of the organized crime strike force, and it was a peculiar position to have him delegated to supervise the discussions that we had about how my cooperation could be presented to the government and how that would affect their prosecuting me. That was in Brazil. We had a visit by the representatives of the Justice Department, who, while we were negotiating a safe way for me to return from Brazil because of threats made against me and my family by a government operative who threatened to kill me after an interview on 2020 demonstrated my decision to go forward to expose the Clinton corruption. That night, after that broadcast, I got a phone call in which threats were made against me and my family, and part of those threats were recorded and sent to Larry, who sent them to the existing Attorney General at the time, John Ashcroft. And that triggered Ashcroft getting I suppose Bruce Orr, who was the head of organized crime, the task force, because the operative that threatened me was connected with the FBI, who was involved in organized crime prosecutions. And that brought Bruce Orr directly into it. And I think, Larry, didn't he come to Brazil to interview me? Among the people that came.
That's correct. And you know, we had, I think, 2 or 3 trips to Brazil. They interviewed you while you were in this dungeon in São Paulo, Brazil, a prison, Brazilian prison.
I was trying to get to, while you were negotiating with Ashcroft and the Chertoff, who was the assistant attorney general, who subsequently became the head of Homeland Security over our objection. If you remember in the Senate confirmation hearing, but Chertoff then delegated Orr, and Orr was then responsible for our discussions on how I could cooperate. Rather than allow me to return to the United States with certain safeguards in place, they had me detained in Brazil with the full knowledge.
We're going to come right back with our next segment, Peter, and pick this up, because this is a super important part of what you're talking about. We'll be right back.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
I'm back with Peter Paul, and we're talking about Bruce Orr, because what happened from that point forward is that, in fact, nothing happened with regard to the Clintons, but an individual by the name of, I don't recollect, Peter, Jeffrey Rosen or David Rosen, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, he wound up getting indicted in Los Angeles for alleged campaign finance violations, but Hillary was never indicted. It went to trial. The jury couldn't figure out why this poor guy was being indicted and tried, and Hillary wasn't, and he wound up getting acquitted. But the bottom line here is that Bruce Orr effectively covered up for Hillary Clinton. He assured me that he would bring about justice with regard to her at the time, assured you. He was down there in Brazil. His people were down there. They were interviewing you many, many hours, many days. Bruce Orr resurfaces again running interference for Hillary Clinton, doing a number on the president with his wife, Nellie Orr, Fusion GPS, the Steele dossier. We all know the story. But you're the one who had the first experience with this character. And, tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, well, first I want to make a quick reference to the David Rosen trial, which was, for some reason, held in Los Angeles instead of Washington, or the place where the campaign was run. Rosen was indicted for allegedly hiding the amount of money that I paid to support Hillary's fundraising activities, notwithstanding that Hillary told the Washington Post 3 days after the event through Howard Wolfson that the event cost over $1 million, and it was an in-kind contribution in reference to my making the contribution. Notwithstanding that the campaign said that, they indicted Rosen because the campaign only reported $480,000 as the cost of the event and misrepresented who paid for it. So somehow Rosen got indicted for hiding the cost of the event that was acknowledged 3 days after the event by Hillary through her spokesman. But worse than that was the entire judicial apparatus was corrupted. The judge who oversaw the trial was appointed by Bill Clinton. His name was Matz. And Matz said before the trial began that Hillary Clinton had absolutely nothing to do with this and that I was a con man. So the judge effectively discredited me and the case before the case began. The government, rather than objecting to that gross intervention by the judge, piped in and said, yes, that's true. Hillary Clinton had absolutely nothing to do with this, and proceeded with this kangaroo court trial that was intended to inoculate the Clintons and to be used as a way to explain, well, that matter was adjudicated and he was acquitted. And obviously...
Well, Peter, and the moral to the story is that Hillary Clinton gets off scot-free. They indict David Rosen, kind of making him the fall guy, and you wind up doing 10 years in prison. And that tells you something about our justice system. You can see what's going on today, and that's why you're telling the story is so important, because you came forward courageously to try to bring about justice. You realized what had went on. You wanted to, hold the Clintons accountable, and this is what happened. And Bruce Ohr covered it up, and so did others. It's interesting, too, that this occurred during the Bush administration, so it tells you that the deep state at the Justice Department was alive and well then and was not being controlled by Bush or the Attorney General.
Absolutely, but Ohr was involved in further discussions in the United States. They used the Brazilian incarceration awaiting the Supreme Court's decision to extradite me as an effort to try to coerce me to plead guilty before I came back. And they said to me, we'll drop the charges if you plead guilty. And I said, I didn't commit a 10b-5 violation. I'm not going to plead guilty. So they kept me there for 2.5 years, and they put me in a maximum security state penitentiary in what was called the Corridor of Death, where they burned prisoners regularly.
Peter, we only have about 15 seconds left. I'm going to bring you back, if you're able to do that, next week, if you're free, to tell more of this story. But this tells you something. They wanted Jerry Corsi, my client, to plead to something he didn't do as well. This is the way things work at our Justice Department, and this is why you need a Freedom Watch and a Larry Klayman and clients like Peter Paul. God bless you, Peter. Thank you for everything that you did.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week with Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.